Friends, today I want to talk about what it means to be a leader in a crisis when the future of an entire country is at stake. Oskar Lafontaine is perhaps one of the few German politicians who dares not only to criticize the government, but also to propose real solutions. In his recent speech, he said that if he were to become chancellor, his first step would be to go to Moscow to resume gas supplies. This statement sounds like a challenge against the background of how Berlin is sinking deeper into the crisis, and Germany is moving faster and faster towards the economic abyss. According to Lafontaine, the country needs strong leaders who are ready to openly name those responsible for disasters such as the explosion of the Nord Stream pipeline and restore Germany's independence. These words raise important questions about the future of the country and its independence. Let's not delay, friends. Let's get started. Before turning to Oskar Lafontaine's incredible words, I want to say a few words about the current situation in Germany. The real masters of political acrobatics, of course, are the Green Party. The historical pacifists who opposed American missiles in the 70s have now become the main supporters of the militarization of Germany. In an interview with Spiegel, Agnieszka Brewer, a defense expert from the Greens, said, "Peace and security can no longer be taken for granted. We need a strong Bundeswehr and a strong NATO to protect our democratic order." These words sound especially ironic if we recall their pre-election promises of a continuous struggle against the supply of weapons to combat zones. Political scientist Matthias Rieder notes, "The Green Party is undergoing an ideological transformation. Their pacifism was convenient in peacetime, but now that Germany is plunging into conflict, they are required to make tough decisions. This is a direct betrayal of their constituents, but in the current political climate it is considered the norm." Against this background, an even more dramatic power struggle is unfolding between Chancellor Olaf Scholz and leader Friedrich Merz. Scholz, confused by economic and political challenges, looks like a weak leader. However, his caution against the background of the ultimatum rhetoric of Merz makes even moderate voters prefer the current chancellor. Karl Halbier, an expert at the Institute for European Policy, noted, "Scholz unexpectedly looks more constructive than Merz, but this is not the merit of the chancellor, but the result of the fact that Merz, with his aggressive rhetoric, scares off even moderate voters." Now let's turn to economics. Last year, German arms exports reached a record 13 billion euros, an increase of 800 million over the previous year. The main recipient of German weapons was a well-known country, which accounted for 62% of all shipments, more than 8 billion euros. Political scientist Christoph Lindau ironically notes, "When pacifism brings such profits, who wants to give it up?" Today, Germany is not only the largest economic player in the European Union, but also the main arms dealer. This is especially interesting if we recall the election slogans of the ruling coalition on peace and disarmament. In parallel, the scandal surrounding Elon Musk is growing. After supporting the Alternative for Germany party, the German media immediately accused the entrepreneur of promoting Russian narratives. Peter Groh, a Spiegel journalist, noted, "The accusations against Musk look absurd, but in Germany, where every criticism is perceived as the Kremlin's hand, this is a standard reaction. Democracy in this country is becoming more and more conventional." Meanwhile, the German economy continues to suffer. Industrial production is falling, companies are moving their factories abroad, and the middle class is struggling to survive. Against the background of the crisis, the military-industrial complex remains the only industry that is thriving. Political analyst Thomas Weigel sums up, "Germany is moving towards militarization, which the Germans themselves do not approve of. People are unhappy, but the political elite continues to increase the production of weapons. This is playing with fire, the consequences of which have yet to be realized." Thus, German politics today is a struggle for survival in the face of a complete collapse of voter confidence. Politicians are changing their shoes on the move, the media is looking for the Kremlin's hand in every uncomfortable statement, and the economy is plunging deeper into crisis, and all this to the accompaniment of loud promises about the protection of democracy. In this regard, it is worth listening to the words of Oskar Lafontaine, who expressed a critical opinion, quote, "When you constantly shoot yourself in the knee, that is, you harm yourself, it's pretty stupid. For example, American sanctions, if dismantled, benefit the United States but harm Europe, especially Germany. And now the destruction of the Nord Stream gas pipeline is added to this. Despite the obvious damage, this destruction is still being denied by officials. We live in strange times, and this has led to such massive economic losses that in Germany alone these losses already amount to more than 1 trillion euros. And anyone who still justifies such a situation, in my opinion, is just stupid. If Oskar Lafontaine were the Chancellor instead of Olaf Scholz, what would he do differently? He answered this question. Friends, here is his quote. Yes, there are two important points at once. First of all, I would go to the evil Putin and say, could you supply us with gas and oil again? He's already done it once. Recently, he even tried to call and said, could you supply us with gas and oil again? It's easy. And to my government, I would say, it's impossible that we buy this through workarounds. After all, we are still dependent on Russian gas and oil. We buy it through India and Belgium in the form of liquefied natural gas and so on. It's just idiotic. That's why I use the word stupid. The second thing I would do would be to honestly rebuild Germany's infrastructure and industry. After all, the destruction of infrastructure is unacceptable. And if you ask how to finance it, then I must say that this conflict must be stopped. After all, it has already cost us so many billions, despite the fact that the costs of refugees that have arisen due to these conflicts have not yet been fully calculated. We also need to respond to Trump when he comes back and tells us that we should pay more. We could say, you pay. You bombed the Middle East, we've been housing these refugees for years, you destroyed our gas pipelines, and now you want us to pay for it. We have significant economic losses due to the sanctions. Pay for it. We finally need politicians like Charles de Gaulle or Willy Brandt who would protect their own interests. Most politicians in Europe are too weak to defend the interests of Europeans. If you tell Trump, we will not pay, a scandal may begin. But he needs to be told. Otherwise, we will find ourselves in a position where we will not quarrel with this strong person. But I don't think so. I would be looking for allies. Germany and France, if they really joined forces, could fight back against Trump. However, France is currently in a rather difficult situation, probably even more difficult than Germany in terms of public finances and everything else. At the moment, Germany and France are in bad shape, but this does not change the concept that I have considered correct for decades. That's why I named the people who did it. I see that you still want to do this, but the question is the position of Chancellor attractive at all? The Chancellor is an attractive position from the point of view of political opportunities, but not from the point of view of the quality of personal life. A journalist asks Oskar Lafontaine a question. Quote, meanwhile, the conflict is developing, and Russia is winning. Those who do not see this are simply blinded. Now comes the President of the United States who says what we have been saying for a year and a half or so, a truce and so on. And since many people follow the government and the opinion of the majority, now suddenly people support the truce and peace negotiations, which a year ago would have thrown stones at us. In other words, the President of the United States, whom you consider to be the cause of the problems, is now perhaps the one who will get us out of there. Quote from Oskar Lafontaine. Yes, that's right. I said earlier that the course of the conflict is ultimately determined by the United States and Russia, and therefore what the US president does is crucial. The end of Lafontaine's speech. Meanwhile, Olaf Scholz, whose popularity today is somewhere at the level of the February temperature in Berlin, suddenly decided to make a political maneuver that made even those who had long written him off start talking about him. The announcement that the current chancellor might be preparing to travel to Moscow sounded like a bolt from the blue. This information was reported by the newspaper Der Spiegel, citing anonymous sources from the Christian Democratic Party. However, this did not stop the wave of discussions because in politics, as you know, there is no smoke without fire. Representatives of the CDU, who traditionally do not miss the chance to criticize their competitor, said that their informants claim that Scholz will go to Moscow not just for a visit, but with a whole diplomatic mandate aimed at resolving conflicts in Eastern Europe. According to them, the chancellor hopes to create a surprise effect by using the tactics of a rabbit out of a hat magician. They even suggested that this could be his last attempt to remain in the memory of voters as a leader capable of making fateful decisions. One of the representatives noted that this definitely won't be an election where you're quietly waiting for the voting date. Everything can change at any moment. Such panic among the opposition is understandable. In the German political tradition, there has always been a place for unexpected moves that overturned public opinion a few days before the election. Just think of Angela Merkel, who repeatedly changed her position. And although Scholz has a reputation for being far from such a strong politician, his willingness to take such a risk may mean a desperate attempt to save his rating, which, according to the latest data, is slowly but surely going down. However, it is worth paying attention to the recent actions of the Chancellor, which cast doubt on his sincerity in matters of peace. At the beginning of the conflict, he completely ignored the need for direct dialogue with Russia. When the situation began to gain momentum, he preferred to hide behind statements of solidarity with his partners in the European Union and the United States. The only call to Putin that took place during this time looked more like a formality than a real step towards improving relations. During this conversation, the Chancellor limited himself to ultimatum statements and demands for the immediate withdrawal of Russian troops, which looked more like an attempt to demonstrate rigidity in front of a Western audience. And now we are discussing his possible trip to Moscow. Is this really a step towards peace, or are we seeing a classic example of a political show? Imagine Scholz going to a press conference with a serious look and saying something like, "We have done everything possible to achieve peace, but the Russian side has remained adamant." This would allow him not only to gain extra points before the election, but also to blame the failure on the intransigence of the other side. As for Scholz, he allegedly consulted with the leaders of other countries before the US elections. According to some publications, both politicians have come to the conclusion that it is time to end the conflict in a well-known country. However, the Chancellor, as always, could not resist his standard phrase, "We will support the country for as long as it takes." This statement looks like an attempt to sit on two chairs at the same time. On the one hand, he demonstrates willingness to negotiate. On the other hand, he remains faithful to the official line of support. This approach, of course, raises more questions than it answers. Against the background of these events, it is impossible not to mention the actions of Friedrich Merz, the head of the CDU, who clearly decided to play on the contrast with the current chancellor. He recently visited one of the eastern capitals, where he not only expressed support for the transfer of missiles, but also hinted at the possibility of sending his armed forces to the east. This statement provoked a strong reaction in society, where sentiments against Germany's direct involvement in the conflict are already growing. But Merz does not seem to be going to back down, using harsh rhetoric to strengthen his position. All this shows how contradictory and confusing German politics has become in recent years. On the one hand, we see the Chancellor, who, despite the decline in popularity, continues to hold on to his position and tries to play the peacemaker card. On the other hand, there is an opposition that is ready to take radical steps just to show its determination and distinguish itself against the background of the government's political weakness. German voters seem to be becoming more and more disillusioned with their leaders, who, in their opinion, are more busy fighting for power than actually solving pressing problems. Meanwhile, experts are not silent. Müller said Scholz's actions look like a panicked attempt to stay afloat. This is clearly intended for an internal audience. The Chancellor wants to show that he is ready to take decisive action, but the chances of real success are minimal. Professor Karl Hartmann added that any step towards Russia could now be perceived as weakness. German society is divided. One part wants to see a leader willing to compromise for peace. The other insists on maintaining a tough stance. Scholz was caught between two fires, the expert emphasized. On social media, where discussions are always brighter and more emotional, the situation caused a storm. One user wrote, "Scholz is trying to make big statements, but where have his efforts been all these years? This is just another political trick." Friends, remember that trips, statements, promises, loud speeches, all this is aimed not so much at a real change in the situation, as at creating a beautiful picture for the voter. But how many more such maneuvers will there be? We'll find out very soon. And now I would like to express my opinion, friends. This material raises many questions and reflections about the current political situation in Germany. Personally, it seems to me that countries like Germany should find a way to real peace, rather than playing political games that could prolong the conflict. I sincerely wish Germany prosperity and peace, and its leaders the strength and wisdom to make the right decisions. I am grateful to Oskar Lafontaine for his honesty and courage to tell the truth, despite all the political risks. It is such people who can inspire change and show that politics can be honest and aimed at the benefit of the people. What do you think about it? Is Lafontaine right in his rhetoric? Write your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And I want to thank you for your attention and wish you good health. Friends, see you later.